Picture this: you're walking through a place where time is stopped, where the walls hold memories of unimaginable horrors, and where the very air seems to whisper warnings to turn back. Today, we're exploring 7 abandoned locations that don't just harbor dust and decay. They harbor secrets so dark, so disturbing, that they've left permanent scars on the fabric of reality itself. In the Venetian lagoon, there exists a small island where the very soil tells a story of unimaginable suffering. What happens when a place becomes so saturated with death that the earth itself refuses to forget? Poveglia Island's dark transformation began during the plague outbreaks that ravaged Europe. As the Black Death swept through Venice, authorities needed somewhere to contain the infected and dying. This 22-acre island became their solution, a quarantine station where the condemned were sent to die. Over the centuries, more than 160,000 souls met their end on Poveglia's shores, their bodies consumed by massive funeral pyres that burn day and night, casting an ominous glow across the lagoon. But death was not finished with Poveglia. In the 1920s, the island found new purpose as a mental hospital, where patients discovered that madness was perhaps a kinder fate than what awaited them. Under the care of a doctor whose methods defied medical ethics, residents became subjects of grotesque experiments. The screams that once belonged to plague victims were replaced by those of the tormented minds trapped within the hospital walls. The doctor's reign of terror ended only when he allegedly threw himself from the hospital's bell tower, though some say he was pushed by the very spirits he had helped create. Today, Poveglia stands abandoned, but the evidence of its horrific past remains impossible to ignore. Agricultural surveys reveal that the island's soil consists of 50% human ash, the cremated remains of countless victims literally forming the ground beneath visitors' feet. Local farmers working nearby plots still unearth human bones with disturbing regularity, their tools striking fragments of femurs and skulls that continue to surface after decades. Those brave enough to set foot on Poveglia rarely stay long. Visitors consistently report an overwhelming sense of dread that seems to emanate from the island itself, as if the very air carries the weight of accumulated suffering. Witnesses describe hearing disembodied screams echoing across the abandoned landscape and catching glimpses of shadowy figures moving between the crumbling ruins. Even the surrounding waters seem cursed. Fishermen working the lagoon regularly find human remains tangled in their nets, forcing them to seek new fishing grounds. The local population has reached an unspoken consensus about Poveglia. It is a place to be avoided. Venetians refuse to visit the island, and even the most experienced boat captains show reluctance when asked to make the journey. Their ancestors lived through the island's darkest chapters, and the stories passed down through generations have created a collective memory of fear that persists to this day. As Poveglia continues its silent vigil in the Venetian lagoon, one has to wonder, when so much suffering occurs in a single place, does it leave an indelible mark on the very fabric of reality itself? Or are some locations simply too damaged by human cruelty to ever truly heal? In the forests of Brandenburg, Germany, stands a testament to human suffering that refuses to fade into silence. What happens when death becomes so commonplace in a building that it leaves an indelible mark on the very walls themselves? The Beelitz-Heilstätten complex was constructed in the late 1800s as a sanctuary for those afflicted with tuberculosis, a disease that claimed lives through slow, agonizing suffocation. For decades, thousands of patients arrived seeking hope, only to meet their end, gasping for breath within these sprawling corridors. The sheer volume of death that occurred here created something that medical science cannot explain, an atmosphere heavy with the memory of final breaths. During World War II, the facility transformed from a place of healing into something far more sinister. The Nazi regime converted sections into a military hospital, and later, Soviet forces took control, conducting medical experiments shrouded in secrecy. Documents suggest that during chaotic evacuations between regimes, patients were sometimes sealed into rooms and forgotten, their remains discovered years later, still confined to their makeshift tombs. Today, urban explorers who venture into the abandoned wings report phenomena that challenge rational explanation. The sound of medical equipment humming and beeping echoes through rooms that have been without power for decades. Shadowy figures in surgical gowns drift silently through empty operating theaters, as if still tending to patients long since departed. Equipment wheels seem to roll of their own accord down darkened hallways. Perhaps most disturbing is the children's ward, where the youngest victims once fought their losing battles against disease. Visitors consistently report the sound of small feet pattering across floors, interspersed with moments of innocent laughter that quickly dissolve into inconsolable weeping. The contrast between joy and sorrow creates an emotional whiplash that leaves even the most skeptical investigators deeply unsettled. The Beelitz-Heilstätten stands as more than just an abandoned hospital. It appears to be a repository of human anguish that continues to manifest long after the last patient drew their final breath. But one must wonder, are these echoes of the past, or is something within these walls still very much alive, forever trapped in an endless cycle of suffering? In the Loire Valley of France stands a castle where time itself seems wounded, where the very walls remember a tragedy so profound that death could not silence it. For over 4 centuries, the Château de Brissac has harbored its most unwilling resident, a specter known only as the Dame Verte, the Green Lady. She drifts through corridors that have witnessed kings and nobles, yet her identity remains as elusive as morning mist. No records bear her name, no portrait captures her likeness, and no grave marks her final rest. She exists in that liminal space between memory and nightmare, between history and horror. Those who encounter her speak of a vision that haunts them long after they've fled the castle grounds. Where a face should be, there is only an abyss, empty sockets that once held eyes, and a mouth frozen in what might be a scream or a plea. The green gown that gives her name flows around a form that should not be, cannot be, yet undeniably is. Guests have abandoned their stays in the middle of the night, their terror so complete that no amount of hospitality could convince them to remain until dawn. But the Green Lady's presence extends beyond mere apparitions. The castle itself seems to bend to her will, or perhaps to her anguish. Servants arrive each morning to find rooms they've known for decades transformed overnight. Doors materialize where solid walls stood just hours before, as if the chateau itself is searching, always searching, rearranging its ancient bones in some desperate quest for resolution. Local archives whisper of a darker truth buried in the castle's foundation. They speak of a woman who met her end within these walls centuries ago, her life cut short by violence, her body concealed so expertly that neither time nor investigation has revealed its location. Perhaps she wanders still because she cannot rest, cannot find peace while her mortal remains lie hidden in some forgotten corner of her prison. In the end, one must wonder, does the Green Lady haunt Château de Brissac, or does the castle, keeper of her terrible secret, hold her captive still, condemning her to walk its halls until someone, someday, finally brings her home? 15 miles off the coast of Nagasaki lies an island that time forgot, where concrete towers rise from the sea like tombstones marking humanity's darkest ambitions. Hashima Island earned its nickname, Battleship Island, from its imposing silhouette, but those who lived and died within its concrete walls knew it by another name, Hell on Earth. During the 1940s, this isolated outcrop became a forced labor camp where Korean and Chinese prisoners descended daily into the bowels of the earth, mining coal in conditions that claimed lives with ruthless efficiency. Deep beneath the island's surface, the underground tunnels became mass graves when mine collapses sealed workers alive in their concrete tomb. No rescue efforts could reach them, no bodies were ever recovered. These men simply vanished into the darkness, their final moments echoing through shafts that would never again see daylight. Then, on a day in 1974, something extraordinary happened. The island's remaining inhabitants simply left. Overnight, Hashima became a ghost town, with meals still cooling on dinner tables and personal belongings scattered as if their owners had intended to return within minutes. Beds remained unmade, clothing hung in closets, and children's toys lay abandoned in apartments that would never again hear laughter. Today, the few visitors brave enough to explore Hashima's crumbling corridors report hearing something that defies explanation. the distant rumble of mining equipment, and human voices drifting up from the sealed tunnels below. The sounds emerge from depths that have been entombed for decades, where no living soul should exist. Perhaps most unsettling of all, locals speak of the concrete apartment blocks that seem to weep during certain weather conditions. A red substance, eerily resembling blood, seeps from the building's pores, staining the gray walls in patterns that suggest something within is trying to break free. One must wonder, in a place where so many souls were lost to darkness and abandonment, what forces still stir beneath Hashima's concrete surface, and what are they trying to tell us from their watery grave? When Eastern State Penitentiary opened its doors in 1829, it introduced the world to a revolutionary concept that would prove to be a cruel experiment in human endurance. Here, within these towering walls, administrators pioneered the practice of solitary confinement, believing that isolation would lead inmates to reflect upon their crimes and find redemption. Instead, they created something far more disturbing. Thousands of prisoners, locked away in complete isolation, began to lose their grip on reality. The silence that was meant to heal instead drove men to madness, and for many, the only escape from their mental torment was death by their own hand. Nowhere was this darkness more concentrated than in Cell Block 12, a section that housed the penitentiary's most violent and dangerous criminals. This wing became notorious, not just for the nature of its inmates, but for the mysterious circumstances surrounding their deaths. Men who had survived the streets, who had faced violence without flinching, would be found dead in their cells under conditions that defied explanation. Guards whispered among themselves about the unusual number of fatalities, but official records remained frustratingly vague. As the years passed, those same guards began reporting phenomena that challenged their understanding of reality. Shadow figures were seen moving through empty cells, their forms just substantial enough to catch the eye before vanishing into the stone walls. Most disturbing of all were the reports of disembodied hands reaching through cell bars, grasping desperately at nothing, as if the very architecture of the prison had absorbed the desperation of its former inhabitants. Even the most notorious criminals were not immune to the prison's dark influence. Al Capone, the infamous Chicago gangster, served time within these walls and claimed that his cell was haunted by the ghost of James Clark, a man whose life Capone had violently ended. The man who had ruled Chicago's underworld with an iron fist found himself cowering from something that existed beyond the reach of bullets or bribes, something that reminded him nightly of the blood on his hands. Today, decades after the last prisoner departed, Eastern State Penitentiary continues to reveal its secrets to those brave enough to listen. Modern investigators armed with sensitive recording equipment have captured unexplained voices echoing through the empty corridors, desperate pleas of "help me" that seem to emerge from the very stones themselves. Cell doors, secured and motionless for years, have been documented, slamming shut with tremendous force, as if the prison itself refuses to let its occupants truly leave. Perhaps the most chilling question remains unanswered. In a place where the line between punishment and torture was so deliberately blurred, where does the suffering of the living end and the torment of something else entirely begin? In the heart of Ukraine lies a playground where no children will ever laugh again, where the promise of joy was transformed in an instant into something far more sinister. The year was 1986, and Pripyat's brand new amusement park was mere days away from its grand opening. Workers had spent months assembling the bright yellow Ferris wheel, positioning the bumper cars, and fine-tuning the carousel horses that would soon carry delighted children in endless circles. The park was meant to be the crown jewel of this atomic city, a celebration of Soviet progress and prosperity. But on April 26th, everything changed. The Chernobyl nuclear power plant, just 3 kilometers away, erupted in the worst nuclear disaster in human history. In 36 hours, every soul in Pripyat would be evacuated, leaving behind their lives, their dreams, and their unborn memories. The amusement park, which had never welcomed a single visitor, became frozen in time, a monument to humanity's dangerous dance with atomic power. Today, that famous Ferris wheel stands as one of the most haunting symbols of human hubris. Its bright paint has faded to a sickly yellow, slowly rusting beneath decades of radioactive rain. The bumper cars sit in silent rows, their cheerful colors now muted by layers of contamination and decay. Yet visitors to this forbidden zone report something that defies explanation: the distant sound of carnival music drifting through the poisoned air, and the ghostly echo of children's laughter where no child has played for nearly 4 decades. Scientific instruments tell an equally disturbing story. While radiation readings throughout Pripyat have gradually declined over the decades, certain areas of the amusement park register inexplicable spikes in radioactivity. The bumper car pavilion and the carousel seem to pulse with energy that defies conventional understanding, as if something more than mere atoms were trapped within their rusted frames. Local researchers and paranormal investigators have begun to whisper of a darker possibility. They speak of the thousands who died from radiation poisoning in the months and years following the disaster, souls whose final moments were filled with confusion and terror. Could their essence have somehow been drawn to this place of intended joy, forever bound to the atomic playground that was meant to celebrate life but instead became a testament to death? Perhaps some disasters leave more than just physical scars on the landscape. Perhaps in places where human dreams collide so violently with reality, something essential gets trapped, waiting eternally for a celebration that will never come. In the hills of Kentucky stands a monument to humanity's darkest hour, a place where death walked the corridors so frequently that the living built a secret passage just to hide its constant presence. Waverly Hills Sanatorium opened its doors in 1910 as a beacon of hope for those afflicted with tuberculosis, the white plague that was ravaging America. But hope quickly gave way to horror as the facility became something else, entirely a waiting room for death. Over the course of its operation, more than 63,000 souls would draw their final breath within these walls, their bodies carried away through a hidden tunnel that staff euphemistically called the body chute, though patients knew it by another name: the death tunnel. Among the most haunted spaces in this sprawling complex is room 502, where tragedy layered upon tragedy in ways that seem to defy coincidence. It was here that a young nurse, already burdened by the daily sight of death, discovered she carried within her both new life and the seeds of her own destruction: tuberculosis. Unable to face the prospect of bringing a child into the world, only to watch it suffer the same fate as her patients, she fashioned a noose and ended both their stories in that sterile room. But death, it seems, was not the end of her vigil. The 4th floor tells an even darker tale, where the boundaries between medical treatment and medieval torture blurred beyond recognition. Here, the most violent psychiatric patients endured experimental procedures that belong more to nightmares than medical journals. Lobotomies were performed with clinical detachment, leaving behind not just scarred bodies, but something else, and residual energy that investigators claim still pulses through the abandoned ward like a diseased heartbeat. Today, decades after the last patient was wheeled through its doors, Waverly Hills refuses to rest quietly. Paranormal investigators regularly document phenomena that challenge rational explanation. Shadow figures that move with purposeful intent, disembodied voices pleading for help that will never come, and full-body apparitions that appear so real they've been mistaken for living intruders. Perhaps most unsettling of all, visitors frequently report the unmistakable smell of rotting flesh mingling with harsh, antiseptic phantom scents from a time when death was as common as morning rounds. As you walk past Waverly Hills today, its broken windows staring out like hollow eyes, one has to wonder, in a place where so many suffered, where so many died in fear and pain, is it any surprise that some part of them might choose to remain? Or perhaps the real question is, what if they didn't choose to stay at all? Thank you for watching until the end of the video. If you found this video interesting, let us know your thoughts in the comments below. Don't forget to subscribe to the channel and turn on notifications so you won't miss any of our upcoming videos.